Welcome to Creative Chats. I'm so excited to have you here today with us, Nour. We just had a really great tour, and we're going to touch on that later. But first of all, if you can introduce yourself and what you do.
First, thank you so much for having me. It was really nice. I mean, the tour was great. You said we'll talk about it, but thanks so much for including this exhibition and for inviting me to take part. So, yeah, I'm an independent curator. I organize exhibitions, but I also commission artists to do new work. I do research, I write. And so kind of like my role is very also interdisciplinary.
Yes.
And yeah, but for this particular moment, I curated the exhibition that is behind us.
Yeah, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
Actually, let's delve in and talk about how you started what was the moment that made you realize this is the career path you want to take?
I wouldn't say there was one moment. I think it was kind of a gradual realization. But I would say, so I did go in, I did study fine art and art history. But the moment that made me realize that this is where I wanted to work, or like kind of my approach and my focus on Lebanese art is actually when I took a class called Art After the Lebanese Wars with Ghalia Saadawi, which kind of really blew my mind and changed my perspectives because, like even at the time when I was a student, it was very, art was Eurocentric, you'd learn about the canons of art history without really realizing that there's a place also for us and for our voice. And so when I was introduced to these wonderful, amazing, living contemporary artists, I realized that I wanted to work here. So I realized that I do have maybe a place to stay in Beirut and work with artists from the region.
So that's I was going to ask you, the next question is how does your city and community actually feeds into your practice?
So Beirut is a muse and a challenge. It's kind of like two heads of the same coin. But I always say that if I were to ever like travel or leave, I don't think I'd keep working necessarily in the arts because I feel like
Yeah.
I think the work that we do here is important. And it's needed for a city like Beirut, for a city that has, very precarious institutions. I mean, it's a precarious city in and of itself. And that seeps into everything. But if I want to focus on the arts and culture sector, there is so much going on. We have wonderful artists and great institutions somehow, but there's always a sense of precarity. We don't know what's going to happen next. We don't know, if we're seeing another year. And so I feel like, yeah, in a way, this is what feeds into why I do what I do.
Yes.
And would love to see more of. And I'm like, okay, if I were to go to France, let's say, like, what would I be adding to a already very developed, landscape with its own artist, with its own vision? I don't see myself potentially like adding a layer of understanding or knowledge. Whereas here, I feel like every project that I do is a step, is kind of like a widening and understanding of artistic knowledge and practice in Lebanon.
Yeah, so you really do stay connected to the local fabric of Beirut or Lebanon itself. But how
I have to glass.
how do you think how the narrative is with the global outreach?
I mean, Lebanon is very connected, right? I don't pretend to be like, a leading voice in that in any way, shape, or form. And with globalization, with our access, and the artists in Lebanon are very well traveled. They're always, in a sense, based between Beirut and elsewhere because there's always also that sense of stability, sometimes somewhere that's abroad. But there's always a way of like coming back to Beirut to be inspired to do the work and then show it somewhere else.
Yeah.
And then what I think is really important and interesting is that, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a visual language. And so that in and of itself is potentially global, right? You produce here, you're very much inspired by Beirut or Lebanon or the region. And so the artistic work is very much rooted here, but could speak to a very large audience, no matter where it is. You know, I mean, there's works that have been shown in Taipei and Hong Kong. So the language doesn't always matter as long as the work speaks on its own.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked a little bit about the struggles of the creatives here in the region, or maybe I think also in the MENA region. This is why we're here to get a voice. But on the contrary, let's talk about maybe what excites you when you are looking to collaborate with artists and curate their art as well.
For me, it's always about the endless possibilities that you start with. And I mean, this is where maybe I would say that, yeah, like there's so much that could possibly still be done. There's so much untapped, I wouldn't necessarily say potential, because I mean, the potential is always there and has been shown in many different ways in many different places. Rather, there's always, I mean, whether it's a new location, you know, because I also don't always work in institutions. So I work in public spaces and in different settings. So it's always that, you know, endless possibilities of when you start a conversation with an artist, or, you know, you start a conversation around a thematic, or I'm asking myself a question, and there is just so many ways that it could respond and that it could resonate, and where it could be shown and how it could be interpreted, and all the knowledge that could potentially emanate from that, like one question or like one artist.
Yeah, it's like a domino effect.
Yeah.
About you.
Exactly. And it's a web. You know, like it just can keep growing. And the challenge then becomes of like, okay, where do you contain it? Like, where do you stop and be like, okay, so this is what we're showing now. And it's kind of like a bookmark of an ever-growing project and questioning and practice.
If you can walk us through like how your creative process of curating are from.
It's different each time,
Yeah.
but in a sense, it's kind of like trying to find. Sometimes it starts with a question, sometimes it starts with a space, sometimes with an invitation. So, you know, but then it's kind of like how to make that bigger. You know, if I get an invitation, how can I, you know, just make it not bigger for myself, but bigger for like, okay, how can I include more people, more voices? Where can that reach to? If it's an invitation for an exhibition, then it becomes like, okay, but then what if it becomes also a commission and also a publication, or maybe like a public program, you know? So it's kind of like how to, starting with one thing, if for example, it's a space, you know, then finding the thematics or the questions around this space, the problematics, its history, the research, and then, you know, the artists that could be brought into, and but also the historians. And so, yeah, it's kind of like just bringing things together,
Yeah.
to kind of potentially create something new.
And today we just had a really great tour of Impressions of Paradise.
Yeah.
Can you talk us through it a little bit?
Sure. So yeah, it was an invitation by the Nahada Said Pavilion for Culture, and they invited me to curate an already existing wonderful collection by Philippe Jabeur. So it's an extensive collection of tourism travel posters spanning the 1920s to the 1970s, and a big focus obviously on Lebanon and Beirut. And they become interchangeable in a way, like Beirut and Lebanon. And so that was kind of the exercise, right? So with already existing works, bringing them to this particular location, which is an annex of the National Museum of Beirut, and thinking of like, okay, how do we exhibit them? What aspects do we lean into? It's not a historical, it's not a survey exhibition at all. It doesn't, pretend to show you everything that took place at that time. Rather, it's an invitation to question this narrative identity building.
Yes.
Through advertisements, because this is what they were. So through advertisements and through travel and tourism and all of that, and all of that, like kind of also political play that goes into that. So, like the rise of graphic design, identity, how do nations self-identify, but also are portrayed by different other nations, and at the intersection kind of like of tourism and travel. Yeah.
How do you see creatives now contributing to the social and cultural aspect?
That's a very interesting and important question, because I think you cannot separate, right? Especially for a city such as Beirut, artists and creatives take on almost a dual role of artist and activist, creative and activist, because there's so much rootedness in the current political and social being that, in a way, their work continuously questions the status quo, what is happening, but also allows different ways of understanding and interpreting the present. And I think this is just what's so nice about, being in conversation with creatives, because they offer always, different questions and more broad, just it expands your understanding.
Dialogue, and being able to share.
Expand your understanding of things, because, I don't know, it's just the creative mind works differently and more playfully and, always curious. And so,
That's better. And what do you wish for the creative ecosystem to look like, with future?
I think the main difficulty in Beirut is, because, they're interconnected, it's the idea, not the idea, it's the instability.
Yeah.
Right?
It's hard to look forward.
Hard to plan ahead.
Absolutely.
And so with that comes its own set of challenges, but creatives have a way of always like kind of turning challenges around. So there's always work happening. We're not defeatist, right? There's no like, oh, so something's happening, so we take a step back. But there's always like different ways of approaching the problem and trying to still make work and still continue despite and around and through the challenges. And so it's difficult, because I don't know, like I would wish for more stability so that there's a bit more like
just a sense of like calm and
peace.
Another question is, how do you personally stay creative in your day to day? I mean, of course you are in the field, but maybe just to get a little
insight. I'm just surrounded by creatives. I guess that keeps me on my toes. And again, I'm a very nature-oriented person, not much of a city girl. So I feel that keeps me open, to explorations. The calm really helps, put all of these ideas together. And I always, maybe that's kind of counter, that's not expected, but half of my life isn't in the creative field. I'm a paramedic. It says so in my bio. I'm a volunteer paramedic. And that gives me like another sense of rootedness that allows me to kind of look at the creativity or experience the creativity on the other hand. And for me, they really do go hand in hand for me, because it's gonna maybe not sound like you'd expect, but for me, life is what I experience in my time as a paramedic. It taught me what life is so that I could then look at the creative part and appreciate it and accept it and understand how they relate and their different timelines and urgencies, because there's that urgency and then everything else is around it, surrounds it in very different ways. So I deal with creativity and that life and that work at a very different pace.
I think that's why I think maybe the sense of peace resonates with you
Yes.
as well. So it grounds you and keeps you creative.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, Nour. We had a great time chatting, and well, I hope you enjoy.